Theology at Durham University, and also from Spurgeon's College and Premier Digital. So we've been looking at missional digitality. What does it mean to be digital in our current age? What does it mean to be engaged in missional work in the digital church during the COVID crisis? And I thought I'd kind of make a presentation of about 20 minutes or so, and then we can have a further conversation if there are questions or points of clarification. Missional digitality. It's really important to kind of understand that what for me is the most important part of what's happening during the COVID crisis is that we're looking at a missional moment, an opportunity to change our understanding of what God is doing on mission, and therefore what we, the church, need to be doing on mission. Missional digitality, then, is how digital can be both a context and a form of mission for the contemporary church. We need to shift into the digital zone in order to do our digitality properly. So let's have a look at what the possibilities are around missional digitality. I want to start off with the research that we have, and what do the stats tell us? And I'm going to go through 3 reports around the subject area that we have to look at. The first one is the Savanta Comres report that we did for Durham University. We explored an online opinion community opinion poll between June and September in 2020. About 2,000 people on the poll panel, and a representative sample of the UK population. Now, the poll asked lots of questions about, first of all, offline activity, what people have been doing before the pandemic started, if they could remember, if any of us can remember, and then whether they increased or decreased or remained the same during the pandemic. And then we had some kind of more statistics about what happened, more summary statistics about what was happening. One of the standouts for us was that London was the most religious part of the nation by far, but also these figures, about 24 to 28% of the adult population regularly engaging in worship, online worship. Now, regularly engaging means monthly, and that's set by the National Social Trends Survey, which says that how many times do you go to church? Regularly, in other words, at least once a month. So 24 to 28%. And we were kind of surprised at this, because when you actually extrapolate those figures, that turns out between 13.9 and 16.2 million people, assuming 58 million population. And so there needs to be a kind of realization this is a huge figure for us to be engaged, especially when the usual attendance of what we see is that there's 5 to 7% normally in attendance in physical church, about 4 million, and you can find that on Clive Field's data on British religion in numbers. So we see then quite clearly there's a potential uplift in online congregations of up to 400%, which seems incredibly high. Perhaps more realistic is the Everyone Welcome Online figure. Everyone Welcome Online is a research project that happened over the last summer and is hosted on the Digital Theology website. And that was realistically more 40 to 50% uplift on what people were seeing. But those figures are kind of very broad, really, because we don't really know how many people are engaging online. We've done a few case studies in which we've seen the 400% increase. We've talked to churches where we've seen the 400% increase. We've seen popular news broadcasting, news stories and so on, where the 400% has been seen. But perhaps we're getting a bit too carried away. I don't know. Younger age groups are also much more likely to engage, up to 48% of 18 to 35s, for example. And we'll look at that in a minute. But also there are things to be very wary of about what's happening. First of all, the digital divide. We know that there are huge numbers of people who simply cannot get online, perhaps because of the their provision isn't good enough, perhaps because they don't have access to digital technology, or perhaps the second one, digital resistance, because people don't have a willingness to engage. They prefer not to engage in digital, especially for something like church. And thirdly, there's been a big digital drop-off. So a whole number of people have decided that they don't want to be part of what's going on. They don't want to be part of church, as it were. And so you've got an awkward kind of set of results here that seem to be kind of pushing us towards thinking there's lots more people online, but also that the 4 million dropped down to about probably 2.5 million who continue to engage in church. And so then there was an uplift of 400%. So this big gap of new people that are coming to see us, if these figures are right for Savanta Comres. Let's move on to another slide to kind of look at those figures in a bit more detail. So here we have a slide which kind of looks at the different age groups that are being represented in online worship. So we asked the question, have you attended online organized group devotional activity? Because this is open to lots of different people from lots of different faiths. And so we wanted to kind of have a question which kind of included online organized group devotional activity rather than simply saying worship. Now you can see here that by far the biggest number of people who engaged are those in the 18 to 35 category, young adults. And then 35 to 44, they're also involved, but then the top three age groups, 45 to 65 plus, increasingly get smaller and smaller. Now, you would expect this because of digital resistance in the older age groups. People haven't grown up with digital, and therefore they're not too interested in what's happening and how they're going to be engaging. And indeed, we found that older people don't participate too much in digital worship. Although, even last night I saw in Twitter saying that somebody had a meeting at an older congregation, and they just the average age of 105. Can't believe that. But how everybody was really, really excited about the snow that was falling. Now that's interesting because, of course, for social interaction, people are engaging for linking with their grandchildren and so on. They are linking, and so what's happening here? There may indeed be something here about social engagement, that older people in our society are not religiously engaged. They were the ones who fell away from church after the wars. And it may well be that they've continued not coming. Though we see many, many people in church who are older, that may be a large percentage of a particularly small group of religious older people, rather than having lots of old people who are engaged. Clearly, this poll seems to suggest that it's the younger people who are interested in online organized group devotional activities. And we need to be aware of that. Millennials, Gen Z, and Gen X, to some extent, are coming to look at this possibility. So that's first of all one of the things. Look at the change, the shift in the congregation and who's coming and who's engaging. Secondly, though, I'd like to look at the Irish Church survey. This is done by Gladys Ganiel at Queen's University in Belfast. Survey in May 2020 of 439 faith leaders. Mostly, lots and lots of them were Northern Protestants who were very, very engaged. And we've got to be aware that not enough Catholics were engaging with this survey. We noticed in this research that 82% continued ministry, that 89% of the population said that faith helped during the cocooning. So there's a kind of grey, interesting kind of level there of people impacted by what's going on. 87% of church congregations provided online engagement. 87%. 56% already had something going on beforehand. I remember, especially in Catholic churches, a great tradition already of digitality and of digital masses. Catholic sites often provided opportunities across the day, although 35% had no provision whatsoever. The survey allowed you to do some free text inputs, and they're really interesting for what we're trying to look at. So the use of Zoom, WhatsApp, Facebook, YouTube, etc. for a range of activities, prayer meetings, Bible studies, youth groups, children and youth groups, book clubs, coffee mornings, afternoon teas, novenas, quizzes, question and answer sessions, marriage courses, retreats, spiritual direction, membership classes, and more. Most faith leaders have directed members of their faith community to other opportunities for online services, fellowship and resources, with 81% indicating that they have done so. So the big seems to be kind of here quite a big shift, that people are engaging much more in discipleship activities rather than just in worship. Discipleship is perhaps as important as Sunday worship. One Northern Irish minister, I think I know, said, we can't go back to where we were. So it's a big uplift, therefore, in what's going on in Ireland during the time and how people are engaged. But let's have a look a bit more about what's happening about when people are engaging. First of all, notice that there's a change in the colours of these bars. And I've tried to do the colours. So blues and greens are mostly the Catholic or others. And so you can kind of see that several per day and once per day are dominated by Catholic engagement. But then when you go to several per week or once a week, we find that it's dominated by Presbyterians, Church of Ireland and Methodist. So gradually the kind of Protestant denominations are sending out stuff once a week or perhaps once or twice a week. But Catholic institutions, especially the diocese, are sending out lots of information all the time, probably on a daily basis. Various activities or prayers or mass and so on. Several per month kind of drop off and none. You can see the figures there as well. In other words, there's a shift here in what's being provided across the denominations, and Catholics are tending to focus a much more upon. Sorry, I haven't moved the slide on that way. Apologies. Sorry. So again, you can notice the colours here. Yeah. Sorry. You can see the colours. You can see that the difference there between the Catholics in greens and blues and the Protestants in yellow, red, and grey. In between those four first columns of what's going on there. Let me kind of sum this up in a further slide. 17,000 services or events were provided online locally in services, Bible studies, morning and evening prayer, and so on. Secondly, the national online services. I'm sorry, I've known it's the Church of England. Let me go back to this. Sorry about this. Mixing up the slides is getting me confused. What's really important here is the emphasis on discipleship rather than just upon a one-day service. And that's a shift from worship being the focus of our engagement to a much broader understanding of discipleship and how we work with things going on all the time. We found, and we'll look at the Church of England figures in a minute, but we found that that's been the case in most of our provision internationally. So you hear much more about Alpha going online very successfully. You find out about how people are engaging much more with prayer meetings and daily prayer, daily offices and so on, and night prayer as well. And indeed, that's where kind of digital provision really kicked off. And so that's quite important and quite interesting. Let's move on to the Church of England reporting. So this is what the Church of England digital team reported back to the Synod back in October 2020. 17,000 services or events were provided online locally. So including services, Bible studies, morning and evening prayer. So massive amounts of the church jumped online and have been online ever since. National online services, which kind of shifted from national virtual services to national online services, which is really good, where 3 million have seen by 3 million people, posted on social media, seen by 23.6 million people, or seen 23.6 million times. Notice here that the figures for people who are not churchgoers, 20% of viewers are not regular churchgoers. Now that's really interesting because that links up very closely with our 24 to 28% in Savanta Comres, where we found that that's the kind of population. So Remember, we had 24 to 28. Take off the 4% that we normally have as attendees, and that's 20% that are both the same. Compare the expected ratio of viewers in studies above to be 40% irregular, 60% irregular or new people. Notice as well the daily prayer app usage has risen by 40% to 7 million. And also the CVE digital training sessions have been seen by 4,200 vicars or church leaders. Now notice all of this is set behind in the background of things going wrong for the church across the country. The numbers of people who are leaving the church are, 2% in 1 year between 2019 and 2020. So we've got a declining church and yet an increase here in the number of people who are engaging with digital church, digital missional digitality. And these figures from the Church of England are very exciting. But you kind of see them matched again in Ireland. You see them matched in our Savanta Comres survey as well. Let's move on. There's another figure here. The church has added more than 17,000 online services or events to a church near you, which is one of the Church of England digital team's key focuses, getting people onto a church near you so they can connect and engage. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. The final research that I want to look at goes across the pond to Barna in the USA. Now, Barna do things in a different way. So you'll notice that the polling numbers are much smaller, between 600 and 1,300 adults, a representative sample of the US population. But these wouldn't really kind of fit in with our polling standards in academic research in the UK. So first of all, notice that 31% of the adult population regularly engaged in online worship. Again, regularly equals monthly. And that's kind of similar to our figure, but America is much more religious than we are. And so you would kind of see that you would expect that to be in the 30s rather than in the 20s. Indeed, it may be a little bit too difficult. Sorry, I just realised that I'm kind of filling some other stuff on here. Sorry about that. I've kind of just copied over the figures into the thing rather than change them over for the American situation. What's happening in America with Barna is quite interesting in that it's, let me go to the picture slide and I can explain it a little bit more. So here you've got the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic views here. And if you kind of look at this, they're asked the question, when was the last time you attended a Christian church other than for a holiday service such as Christmas or Easter, or for special events such as a wedding or funeral? So in other words, when did you go to church for worship? And you can see that all US adults within the past week, within the past month, add up to 32% on this slide. And then you've even got more than a month ago, another 8%, more than 6 months ago, 7%, more than a year ago, 39%, and so on. So those figures from the blue up to the red and the green, the grey, sorry, are more negative, but the first two are very, very positive. Notice the practicing Christians are those who are defined by their church-going activities, and so 100% of them go at least once a month. And then church adults, those who do engage at least once a year, kind of connected to the church in some way, you'll see again there's a very high percentage here of 80% who are going pre-pandemic. So what happens during the pandemic? Well, very interestingly, Barna changes from green figures here to red figures being positive. And I think that's quite interesting because it seems to kind of push a kind of negative image of what's happening in this slide, in this second group of figures. But the figures are still good. They also change the boundary to weekly, 2 or 3 times per month, or 1 time a month. So you've got to take the red, the orange, and the blue together in order to make up what's being said here. And here's the 31% that I was talking about before. So 31% of all the US adults are attending church at least once a month. During this lockdown. Indeed, 19% are attending weekly. Now, that's just about the same as being pre-pandemic. We saw that the monthly rate there was 32, now it's 31, so slightly down, but intriguing. The never figure is very interesting in that 53% have never attended online worship. So you've got the same amount coming up, but the irregulars are kind of shifting away from it. Practicing Christians, again, and a more negative figure towards the end in the grey and the black, once or twice or never, and also for church adults as well. So the situation in the States is a bit different because you've got more people attending. In any case, a much higher figure of the population attending, but some negativity about it. But of course, in the States, there's all the political issues that are going on about whether people should go to church or whether people should persist in being at church rather than going online. Online was kind of seen as being a cop-out to what was happening. And so there's big political issues around what's happening here about online church in the States. One more poll. There's some questions about where we might go next from various polls and various situations. There is a definite warmth around a balance between digital and physical, that hybridity seems to be here to stay. So in a Church of Scotland synod poll, 66% wanted to maintain a digital presence once the pandemic had finished. Which is a good figure, and higher than you would probably expect there to be. Secondly, in the Irish polling by Queen's University Belfast, 70% of people in that survey wanted to keep some or all digital engagement. That whole report was called People Still Need Us, which seems a bit needy for me. But this sense that they found a connection between the churches and the people. Notice in Ireland, there's been huge rifts about the Catholic Church's background in news reports and so on. And yet the Irish Catholics especially, Irish Republic Catholics especially, found that the church still had a place within society, still needed to be engaged with. One of the phrases that came across in a lot of the research that we found was that you've set up a comfy sofa for us behind the back pew. This sense that there is an ongoing engagement, an ongoing connection between what's happening. But there is also the problem about the rural church and whether this means the demise of the rural churches. If so many people are not able to get onto online church and haven't engaged with church during the lockdown, does that mean this kind of the habit will have changed? The desire to go to church simply drops off and people get more and more used to not going to church at all. And so we have the potential problem of many churches closing. And that's happened in this area around Durham as well already. I live up in Durham in the northeast. But notice Barna's push for physicality of church, that 81% of those expressed that it was important to experience church alongside other people. 81%, very, very high, that physical presence with other people was really important. Church isn't just about going in and worshiping and then leaving. It's about doing that with other people singing and praying and around you. 71%, though, at the same time, Barna, see value in attending online service. They asked in a negative. They said, do you see that, do you agree that online worship is irrelevant or something? And 71% disagreed with that. So they actually had to kind of go out of their way to say they disagreed with what Barna were asking them. 70% of American people interviewed said they were spiritually growing despite the lack of physical church. So that's quite interesting that there is this kind of warmth still towards hybridity, even in the American situation. And 20% of people interviewed in the Barna report exhibited high digital openness, young generations pointing to hybrid church as important for the physical future of the church. And we're going to look at some of those figures later on. So overall, there's this kind of sense of engagement in the church, with the church, engagement in what's going on. Let's look at the next slide. Here we go. Faith expressions during the pandemic. Again, this is a very interesting way that Barna kind of set out their figures, because down here at the bottom, let's just look at the bottom columns where the columns are kind of dangling down. So they start with churched Gen Z, and Gen Z are the contemporary population 18 14 to 25 at the moment. Church to millennials, those aged under about 35 at the moment. 58s are the Gen X's, people in their up to their 50s, and then the boomers are those in their 60s and over, and what have you. And you can see that gradually, as you go from Gen Z to the boomers, there is a gradual decrease in how many people are engaging in faith expression using the internet, as it were, for faith purposes. Church boomers engage with other things like physical Bibles or Bible study groups or prayer meetings and so on, in order to get their faith input, or indeed through the TV and other things. They don't go onto the internet. Whereas those engaged in the internet all the time, up to 90% of Gen Z and millennials are engaging with the internet for everything. And here we see almost 2/3 kind of engaging with the internet for faith purposes. Again, you see the same kind of figures as a faith supplement, as also as a substitute for physical church. And I noticed substitute for physical church is very interesting, because that's it's actually against where you would really expect the people to even use that terminology. Tim Hutchings wrote the book on online church and found that very, very few people used online church as a substitute for physical church. But in a pandemic, what else do? You have to use that. So whereas Tim Hutchings always said the digital feeds the physical, digital church feeds the physical church. People come to digital church for a while and then go on to physical church. Here you see a kind of drift in the younger generations towards using it as a substitute. So people may well be drifting away by this time. Let's look forward to where we may be going, and a few ideas here. I think there's four or five about where we might need to go to. First of all, what does the data suggest for the way forward? The future is hybrid, or as they might say in the States or in East Asia, phygital, the best of both worlds. Phygital is physical and digital kind of tied together. So if we're going to look at the possibility that digital is here for a long time to stay, what does that mean for us in the church? Well, it has implications for a ministry and support team. Do we need to provide digital ministers? Do we need to train ministers and vicars in digital ministry? Do we need to look at the support team around them? That actually we need to look at expanding that support team to bring more and more people onto the ministry team. Do we actually need to look at different local churches providing different provisions? So at the moment we have resourcing churches. Should the resourcing churches provide the digital, whereas other churches provide simply physical provision? Although does that break down community, and does that kind of anchor more and more resources into the resourcing churches? Do we need to bring in the we need to bring in the creatives, technologists, and the digitally aware. It's not do we need to, we definitely need to. We need to have these people brought back in. Matthew Fox once says there will be no revival until the artists are brought back into the church. So there cannot be a hybrid church without more people engaging in digital technology and who are aware of what needs to happen in digital things like this, in this webinar and in service provision. Of course, it's the young people who are really, really knowledgeable about digital engagement and so on. And so the more we can do, the more that would be possible, the better that would be. There is also an alternative. Jay Kim has brought a book out called Analog Church, in which he talks about the need for grandma's church, a kind of romantic look back to when church was full, when church was booming, and when people, didn't have digital to fall back on and so on. And in those times, grandma's church focused upon much more physical engagement, and Jay Kim says that's where we should be heading. I'm not sure, but it's a romantic image of what church might be. Notice here a few things from Mark Hewitt, Rediscover Church, in the blue box. The ship sailed. It's time to embrace the new, to extend your now. That if we don't, he's actually arguing in his talk for the Ecclesia conference, Ecclesia podcast last week, that that if we don't shift to digital, we actually face closure ourselves. We've got to think network, think global, think engagement, think mission. Follow the patterns from Acts rather than your patterns before COVID. So look back to the church meeting together and engaging with that. So here we kind of go back to the second pink point on the slide, connection and community above perfect content. So it's really important that when we think about what we're doing online, that we're not thinking about trying to be the BBC. We're not trying to get the perfect kind of production and everything. But instead, we need to shift from gathering congregations away from kind of attractional mission that we want people to come to our buildings to fill our pews. Instead, that we need to connect through networks, network society, liquid church, Pete Ward, Church Without Walls as well. This sense that people may be drawn to gather together with us through networking, through events that we put online, and so people can kind of be distributed but come together in that place. Carrie Newhoff, church Fresh Expressions advisor in the States, talks about creating a tribe, not a platform. How do we build together? How do we build together effective alliances for spirituality, for social renewal, and for community growth? A couple more slides. Next one says that we need to be well aware of the generational differences that offer potential new engagement with the young adults. 71% of boomers love physical. Compare in the UK, 10% over 65 plus engage in online worship. The figures are very, very low for online and those older generations. Now, it's really interesting that boomers are the ones who are in our leadership structures at the moment. Many people engaged in that, and therefore you can understand the kind of resistance to online worship. And online church, in the other direction, is most popular in the UK and the US amongst younger adults who aren't necessarily in our leadership structures and aren't in our kind of organizational structures either. And there needs to be a big shift in that. As we bring in the creatives and technologists and digitally aware, we need to make them part of the thought making, the decision making process that we have in the church. If we want to move into the new church, into the new normal, then we need to bring digital engaged people into that situation. But also, it's not just about church services. The whole thing is about creating ritual and spirituality online. So how do we create opportunities for prayer and ministry online? How do we free up people to do more charismatic prayer meetings, more ritual prayer meetings, more masses online? How do we kind of get more and more and more of our work online to engage with people? Will the large denominations resolve their issues over online communion? How do we develop our devotional life beyond Sunday worship? How do we move those sofa viewers from the sofa at the back of the pew to being disciples through Alpha, through Bible study, through prayer meetings, through daily spirituality? We can't just allow people to be back there. We need them to be up front as well. Also, how do we learn from the Catholics in Ireland? Our provision needs to be spread across the week rather than just focused upon Sundays. Notice that, remember that figure where the Catholics were kind of focusing lots and lots of things on spreading out during the week, whereas the Protestants were all going for Sunday. Yep. And so you're kind of replacing the Sunday thing. I think in the future, we'll go back to physical church on a Sunday, but we'll put all of our discipleship stuff online. People won't have to come out in the dark. People won't have to go out to house groups and what have you. There'll actually be Zoom groups and Zoom prayer meetings and so on. I know that in our church, we kind of shifted from about 10 people in the prayer meeting up to 50 to 60 in the prayer meeting at the moment with Zoom groups and breakout groups and so on happening all over the place. Remember, I think it's Wesley who said it, but lots of other people said it as well. We are called to make disciples, not just converts. It's important that we shift people away from this kind of focus on Sunday-only worship to discipleship all the time. Again, Mark Bew, we pray daily online, we speak in tongues daily online, we share communion online every day, even over Christmas. We seek God online at all times. One more page, I think, of these reflections. We need to seek the lost. we need to go and find out what's happened to those who've left the church and why they're going. So how do we engage with new people exploring digital and or spirituality? If Carey Nieuwhof's right and the majority of people are no longer in the room, then how do we attract them? How do we bring them in? How do we engage with people that we don't know? And that's pure evangelism. That's pure going out there and finding how we can do it and using digital as a means to engage with people. How do we recapture the digital dropouts, those who went on sabbatical during the lockdown, who felt that they didn't want to go online church? How do we bring them back if hybrid's the future? Perhaps bring them back to physical church, but also bring them back into Bible study groups and prayer groups and so on. How do we help the digitally divided, those with no tech, no data, and no inclination? Do we need to actually provide laptops for people, provide tablets for people so they can engage? Do we need to shift the technology onwards so the Alexa might have a screen so you could have a Bible study on your Alexa device at home? Or Bible study through the digital TV of some kind or other so that it becomes interactive, or Bible study through Facebook online that could perhaps be put through a console or something. How do we move the technology forward so that we can connect with people, not necessarily with them providing a new digital device themselves? Know the need to create as well digital safe places for those the disabled who've been online much longer than most of us, but also those who are scared of coming into church, those who have suffered abuse and so on. And also where do we put the robust digital ethics about what's going on, not allowing flaming, not allowing people to be intolerant with one another, seeking to build community and engagement rather than harm people. And finally, include everybody. Digital church, hybrid church, is actually about inclusion. It's about saying that if you can get to the physical church, you're still part of the body of Christ. You're still part of who needs to be at church and with us. So digital helps us include people who are housebound, long-term sick and disabled. Digital stops us privileging one space to encounter God. It's not as though, the vicar's got God in a cupboard and brings him out on a Sunday and we can all worship him, and then he's quickly shoved back in the cupboard at the end of the day. God is in all, through all, and over all. God pervades the universe, and we too need to have that opportunity to see God in everything, that God is here in our homes, that God is here in digital, that God connects us online. And also digital offers us an opportunity to include all ages, all types of people, to share around the digital table, the altar and the cross. The future is digital. The future has to be the way that we move forward. And that needs to kind of be this kind of hybrid sense that we use buildings that we still celebrate together, hopefully one day singing together. But as this pandemic has shown us, and as some have suggested there will be future pandemics, we also need to build our spirituality, which is robust enough that it cannot be pulled out from under our legs every time there's a pandemic or a health scare. Instead, we need to build safe places where we can safely worship God together into the future and ensure that the church is not locked. Instead, it's open on digital through Missional Digitality. Thanks very much for listening. And hopefully our host, Carla, is going to come back on and we can have some questions and answers or conversations or some further discussion.
Hi, Pete. Thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. I have seen that we have had a question come through. I'm sure some more will come through shortly as well, but I will put this one to you and it'd be great to hear your response. So Matt has asked, if in the future we shift to in-person meetings on Sunday and discipleship during the week, should we rethink what we actually do on a Sunday to make sure that the in-person meets people's needs for physical connection and relationship, rather than just preaching and communal singing?
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things that we did online was to, I think, shall we stop sharing the screen? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's good. One of the things that we did on one of the things about church is it's a theatre as well. Okay, we're kind of presenting this theatrical thing about worshiping God, and that's part of being the mass, or the kind of worship that we do, the services that we do. It's not just about preaching or whatever. It's praying, it's singing, it's processing, it's the whole lot. And that production led us to jump onto YouTube and Facebook as a way of kind of presenting something like songs of praise or something. And instead, the church kind of shifted in the second half much more over to Zoom, which is about community. The sense that we still do some of the presentation stuff. We still have somebody preaching normally, or praying, or giving an interview, or testifying, or what have you. Sometimes the worship leader will lead us in worship. But on Zoom, you can see everybody. You can connect with everybody. You can kind of wave to everybody and so on. The kids can mess around and what have you. And in a way, that kind of reminds us that our church services often are not places where we have connection or community. We often look at the back of somebody else's head, because we're kind of in rows. What do we do to church to make it more a place of contact, where we privilege engagements and so on? Do we meet around tables like Cafe Church and have food and share with one another? Do we do much more kind of interactivity in there, sharing a piece, sharing communion, sharing whatever we can do together in church, so that we privilege that connection, so that we do the physical stuff in church, and actually then we can kind of do more kind of discipleship and leadership and teaching online in a less physically focused place.
I mean, you kind of thrown the question back a little bit, really, haven't you, there? Because it's, I guess, it's such an open-ended thing. Matt, if you feel like you want to come back to that, please do. We have a couple more questions for you as well. A couple from Rosalind. Rosalind has asked, are there any ideas or tips for online evangelisms or alpha, personal invitations to online church or social media?
Yeah, I think first of all, we've got to kind of build relationships with people, and I think this is especially important to kind of work out: are you engaged in social media or social networks already? So, are you part of your village or your town's Facebook postings, or your community groups, or your street group, and so on? And when you're there, how do you build up your own presence? How do you build up your own understanding of what people are doing? So that's listening. It's trying to find out what's on people's agendas, how are they engaged. But then how can you help? How do you provide physical support during lockdown and so on? How do you engage with people in a kind of gentle way, acting justly, loving mercy, and walking humbly with your God, as Micah 6:8 says? Notice I haven't yet talked about evangelism at all. Don't go on your Facebook page and say, I love Jesus. Do you love Jesus? Come and talk to me. Yeah. Because that's not kind of being practically out there and kind of helping people. Notice Jesus went and helped people. He turned water into wine. He provided food for people. He healed the sick and so on. And at the same time proclaimed the gospel. So to just be sensitive about what's people's needs at this time and how can I help online, and engage with people in that way. Build up your relationships and build up those connections, and be a natural Christian, naturally Christian in what you're saying, and follow Micah 6:8. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. People will see that, and they'll then be able to follow you and kind of work out where you're coming from. One of my big posts in my local village group at the beginning of lockdown was to put up a lit candle in the front room window and take a picture and put it on the Facebook group and said, Christians throughout this town are praying for you at this time. And a few people came back and really kind of, hammered that post and said, oh, if there was a God, then there would be no COVID. But then a number of people jumped on them, sadly, and I had to stop that. But and saying, oh, don't be nasty. This guy trying to be kind and gracious and generous, and thank God somebody's praying for us. And in the end, because I said, oh, don't be nasty to one another, please. This isn't what we're about. We're about trying to love one another. That sense of love and compassion is what really kind of worked its way through in the end.
I was actually going to, that strange enough was the next question I was going to add in addition to that, in terms of resistance and
Yeah.
how would, when wanting to not promote, but wanting to invite people and open yourselves out to encourage others to join in with the online worship and community, like how do you manage resistance? But I mean, obviously you've given a really lovely example of how people almost jump to the fence, but when you don't have that, how would you help someone manage or navigate that situation?
Yeah, I think we've got to love people. Love, love, love. That's the key. A friend of mine, Jo Cox Darling, she lives in the Midlands, and she started putting it all the way through lockdown. She put an easel every Sunday, put an easel outside her garden gate. Okay, and on this easel there would be badges for NHS workers, or tea bags for people to go and make a cup of tea and have some time out, yeah, or chocolate eggs and stuff like that. And this sense of kind of giving and providing, and her house is right next to the church, so kind of people connected. And then she moved on to doing labyrinths in the church car park, and then communion within the labyrinth and so on. So it's this gentle journey toward it. And then over Easter they got an artist to write to build angel wings, or to paint angel wings throughout the town. Okay, and people started taking pictures of those angel wings and putting them on social media. And then she gathered all them together on social media and started saying, look, Codsall, we can all be angels together. We can help one another, we can love one another. And I think it's doing that rather than simply going in and saying, turn or burn. If you don't turn, you're going to burn in hell. That's just going to wind people up. We need to, in a time of pandemic, as every time, we need to love people into the kingdom and find ways of connecting with them in sympathy and compassion and healing. And then hopefully we'll get to the conversations where God will provide us with the moment and the words to say what needs to be said.
That's brilliant. That is great. I totally agree with that as well. And I think what your friend did in the Midlands is absolutely beautiful as well. I think we've seen lovely acts like that recently, and to use that as an avenue just to show God's love, I think is brilliant. So yeah, that's something we can definitely all learn from. Okay, we've got one last question here. If anybody else wants to add any more questions, please do. But the question we have here, the second question we have from Rosalind, is which statistic that you shared are you most excited about?
So the 48%, or almost half of young people engaging in online worship, is a phenomenal figure. I'm scared of that figure because I don't believe it. But I'm scared that I don't believe it. And I lecture here at Durham on an MA course in data science, and I took that figure to a data science class, the seminar that I was running, and gave it to the students and said, okay, tear this apart. And they looked at the figure, they looked at the background of the survey, who had done it, and so on and so on, and said, this doesn't seem to be wrong. One of the things I've said is perhaps they're aspiring to go to church, and that 48% figure is they're kind of hopeful they could get there. And they said, but young people don't aspire to go to church. They aspire to be, have 50 million followers on TikTok. They aspire to, have this or do that or be this and so on, or just get through COVID. And they don't aspire to go to church. So that's wrong. You're thinking in the wrong. You're too hesitant about this figure. This figure looks right to us as data scientists. Now, if that's the case, that's a huge number of people who are engaging with God outside the knowledge of the church, because we don't have half the population in church of young people in church engaging. God seems to have attracted them all by himself. Yeah, and God's provided the call and they've answered. And so for me, that's the figure that we've suddenly got a whole new audience of people who are interested in church. And Youth for Christ, of course, brought out a survey during the lockdown, where they said that these are now the open generations. They're not secularized. They're actually spiritual people who are grown up enough to kind of think, actually, we want to ignore all this kind of negativity about Christianity. We want to see what it's about and take it seriously. And if that's the case, that's exciting, because we have a new opportunity for evangelism amongst young people, amongst young adults, that we need to take seriously.
Amazing. I think, and it just, and as you said, like, I think there's something very special about the fact that they are seeking it themselves. It's there, and based on everything that you've just said, we really need to tap into that and be ready to take them in. The last thing we want to do is have this amazing influx of young people who will have such an incredible impact and be stuck. So I guess our prayer, and yes, Rosalind, amen, totally agree. Like, we have our work cut out for us to ensure that we are able to nurture and guide and disciple everybody who does start to come through the digital doors as well as the physical doors. Looks like we might have another question. Bear with me. Okay, this is an interesting one. So, do we know of if any other faiths have seen a similar increase?
Yeah, so it's very interesting in that the two of the main faiths in our country, Judaism and Islam, are both family orientated religions, and the prayer and worship begin within the family. And in both cases, the religions haven't really missed engagement, physical church engagement, or going to synagogue or to the mosque, because they've been able to go and pray within your family groups, and the church have done that. But the thing on the young people, I was talking on a religion media centre webinar ages ago, and somebody came on from Cardiff, a researcher there, Ahmed, and he said that we should no longer call Islamic youth as secularized. We should understand them as having a spiritual identity, as this kind of openness to spirituality. So there is a kind of shift there in what we're understanding about Islamic youth. And of course, there is a whole movement within Judaism of young adults and young people connecting together through Limud and other organizations. So yes, there is a shift. It's not just Christianity. And in the States, where there is a similar shift called moralistic therapeutic deism, it's a big title, but Soul Searching was a book written about 10 years ago. That same shift goes across lots of different religions, as kind of God seems to be calling younger people to kind of step up and ignore the secularization agenda and instead see faith as really important for them.
Fantastic. So that's incredibly interesting, and I guess something we need to kind of keep our eye on as well, just to see how it is, and see how that models and shapes our youth as they continue to move forward. If anybody has any more questions, please do send them through. We've got a couple more minutes, but if not, not a problem. Thank you so much for the questions that have come through. I think we've had some really interesting questions, and the insight has been fantastic. Pete, is there any other final remarks that you'd like to give before we wrap up today?
I think the for me, the other phrase that Carrie Newhoff said was that we're called to fulfill God's mission, not to fill auditoriums. And that's really interesting about the kind of shift towards a missional digitality. That what's really important is not necessarily how many people are coming to our services, although we'll always like to kind of play with the figures. It's not really matter how many people are filling our churches. What really matters is, are we engaged in the mission of God? Are we seeing where God is on mission and joining him there? And because that's the most important thing. And if it's true that God is reaching out to in mission to the younger adults, then that's a really good mission opportunity for us. But also, if he's using digital and hybrid methods to do his mission, then we need to follow him and to begin to build up those resources within the church today.
Fantastic.